Hello, thanks for joining me for this webinar on happy, healthy, and thriving children. So really appreciate you tuning in, putting aside the time to improve your health and your family's health. So looking forward to empowering you with the latest knowledge on how to create a thriving family. So just a little bit about me for those that don't know me. I'm Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. I have my family here on the left, and my lovely wife, Adriana, my daughter, Sophia, and Ollie. And I have 3 bachelor degrees. I have a degree in nutrition and dietetic medicine, a degree in complementary medicine, and a degree in chemical engineering, and a passion for family and children's health. So really inspired in terms of helping families create a thriving home for their family to grow and develop in the most optimal way. So we're going to be covering that today. But before we get started, I'd certainly like to put forward my disclaimer. This advice is general in nature and is not specific to anyone's circumstances. So if you have a specific need, then please seek the help of a professional that can service that need. So yeah, all the advice I'm providing is general in nature, and I do not understand your personal situation, circumstances. And my claimer is that I'm not going to be preaching to you on how to parent. That is not my job today. My job is just to put forward the evidence, the information, the knowledge that works. And as I said before in my disclaimer, it may not work for your family situation. It may not be irrelevant. However, there may be some parts of the information I impart that really resonate with you, and you might want to implement that. However, if you're really needing help in a particular area, I thoroughly recommend you seek help from a professional in that area. So enough of that. We're going to be covering today mental health, which is so important. As you know, in terms of coming out of that pandemic, mental health has been at the forefront, and where now some experts are claiming that we're in a mental health pandemic. So we're certainly going to be covering off that. We're going to be covering off healthy eating and sleep, and it's all oriented around the family. In terms of the age group it's relevant to, I'll be more talking to the younger age, so sort of less than, I guess, pre-teenage years, so more that preschool, primary school years. Obviously, some of the information is relevant to raising teenagers, but but not all of it. So parts of it will be. So let's get started. Let's get into the mental health side of things. But first and foremost, as you've probably realized this, our children look up, and they have a huge amount of admiration, and we're the world to them. We're their world. And this is where this leading by example comes into it. They will copy us, and particularly in those first 7 years of life where they're just absorbing everything from the world like a sponge. Those are the years that things will get embedded, that you want to be healthier or better for their development, as opposed to the contrary. So it's really important that you lead by example, and lead in every aspect of how you would like to see your children develop. So if you want your children to be great communicators, then you need to emulate what great communication is and set the standard, set the expectation around communication. If you want your children to be great leaders and not followers, then you need to show what leadership is. You need to demonstrate it. And remember, children will learn from how you act as opposed to what you say. So they're more going to see how you play it out as opposed to the words you say. So you've got to be congruent with children. They'll see through it very quickly. And so certainly take leadership seriously. And yes, the other aspect to this is being human. So we are human and we do make mistakes, and we need to admit to our mistakes and show our children that we are human. And yes, we make mistakes, but that's part of life. And to share with them that there's no such thing as perfectionism. We can strive towards perfectionism, but we never achieve it. And we need to be clear for that, that we can have high standards for our children, but let them know it's a journey. It's a constant journey and a never-ending journey. So it's just like education. Education doesn't just end when you finish high school or when you finish university. Education is something that you can always do every day, and it's part of my life. Every day I'm learning, and it's driven through curiosity and my desire to want to know more and to be able to better serve and help others. So leading by example is really, really important. And a lot of what I get back to will be back to this point about leading by example. And it's do as I do, not do as what I say. Because, yeah, as I said, the children will pick up on the incongruence. And so this leads me on to the next point is, if we're going to be talking about mental health, I just want you to just take a moment now to reflect on your mental health. How are you? Do a little self-reflection, a check-in as to how you're doing, and be honest with yourself. Are you faring well, or you're feeling run down? You're feeling the effects of the pandemic, the hecticness of constant change and having to adapt. It takes a toll on the body physically, and it could be taking a toll mentally now. So I want you to reflect now, how is your mental state? Are you anxious? Are you feeling a little down? Are you feeling great? It's just important to have that check-in and to check in as to how you're going, because that is how it's going to, well, it's not going to be how, it's going to have an impact on your children. They will pick up whether you're anxious, whether you're feeling down, whether you're up. They'll pick up on that. And they'll either feel secure or they'll feel insecure. And so parents' insecurities can be easily passed down to the children. Parents' anxiety can be easily passed down to the children because they pick up on your energy. They read your energy. Yes, you can say nothing, but they will read your energy. They can pick up whether you're feeling great and you're a great provider and protector for them, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that provider and protector because they need you. They're dependent on you. They're not yet at that independent stage. It's a bit different in the teenage years. They are starting to develop that independence, essentially. So they're not as reliant on you. However, in those earlier years, that preschool, that school, primary school, they're very dependent upon you. And so they're going to be looking at you for that modeling as to what to emulate or to copy or to, before they obviously develop that ability to then choose and decide and rationally think things through. At the moment, in those younger years, they're really sponges. They're just absorbing. And I just want to share a story with you about this absorption as a sponge. My daughter, Sophia, she was she could talk. So she's certainly around that 18 months, I think 18 months, 2 years. I may have that wrong, but she was certainly very young. And I remember Adriana, my wife, was driving, and we hit a speed hump at speed. And I, obviously was very jolted by the speed hump. And I swore, I said the F word, I dropped the F word. And it was, I don't know, weeks later or days later, but we happened to be driving and we hit a speed hump. And then I heard my daughter, Sophia, repeat the word. And so she associated speed humps with that word because she looked up to me. And I probably said it in probably an angry voice or an upset voice, so emotional voice. So it had she picked up on the energy that I was feeling unsettled. And she probably thought, well, she drew the association, speed humps, that word, that's what you say. Well, that's what a speed hump is, or that the feeling of a speed hump is the F word. And then the story goes on that she was traveling with her grandparents, and long and behold, they go over a speed hump, and then Sophia drops the F-bomb, and they were mortified to hear that. And they probably were in disbelief and still in disbelief today. But we, I did acknowledge, and I admitted to my mistake. But yes, as parents, we do make mistakes, and and just obviously acknowledge your mistakes and move on, and just say that it's not a word that should be repeated, and it's I apologized, and it was inappropriate, so to speak. So that's just a little story I wanted to share on that. And this, as we go through this webinar, it's going to be addressing this mental health holistically, because mental health and health in general requires a holistic approach. And so hence I've covered 3 topics in this webinar, which is mental health, food or nutrition, and sleep. However, there's the whole thing around exercise, relationships. We'll certainly talk about mindfulness. But yeah, we're not covering all aspects of mental or all aspects of holistic health, but we're certainly covering the big ones I see where typically children could do more, or the parents could help facilitate children to do more in these areas that will really help with their learning and development. So that's it for this slide. I'll move on to the mental health in terms of how to elevate it. And as I touched on before, it's really starting with you and doing something about your own mental health. If you're not in a good space, then you need to seek some help to get your head in a good space so that you can provide the best supportive environment for your children. If you let your mental health deteriorate, so will your children's mental health. It's incredible the number of children or even adults I see where their parents had the same mental health issues, exactly the same, whether it be anxiety, depression, or other issues, PTSD, other mental health issues. It's passed on from generation to generation. You've heard of intergenerational trauma. So these Indigenous populations, the trauma they experienced when the country was invaded has been passed on to generations, the stolen generation, as we know here in Australia, that has been passed on. That trauma suffered by those children that were separated from their parents was passed on. And this intergenerational trauma can build and it can result in some severe mental health issues for future generations. So we really want to do the best we can to correct the course of our familial mental health. So the more you can do to address your mental health is really helpful for your family situation. So if you're not in a good space, I really recommend you do something about it, and do something about it really quickly. Get some help, and that way you can be a better parent and a better leader, a better mentor, and you obviously benefit from supporting your own mental health. Here I'd like to touch on the next step in terms of elevating your mental health is checking in as to whether you're living by your values. Everyone, and this work comes from Dr. John Demartini. So he's published a book on the values factor, really good book, thoroughly recommended. And he talks a lot about how we are, if we live in terms of what is important to us by our values, we live an authentic life, and we can then live in a heightened state of awareness or elevated thought presence. So essentially there's 2 areas of the brain he talks about, and the system 1 area of the brain is the amygdala, which is also the part of the limbic center, which is the emotional center of the brain. So they're part of the same area in the sort of around the middle of the brain. And this center is our survival center, so to speak. And it's a state where you'll typically find people are living if they're anxious or depressed. Okay, so if you've got, really not great mental health, then you're probably in this center of the brain, or predominantly living in this center of the brain. And this center of the brain has really fast pathways because it's our survival area. So it helps us get away from predators and helps us towards or get what we seek and desire, such as the prey. And so it's very adrenaline driven, right? So, adrenaline to get away from the predator, or adrenaline to catch the prey so we can survive. And this is this fight, flight, or freeze response that you'll hear about today. This sympathetic, it drives the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight, fright, or freeze response. So the other area of our brain, which is elevated level of awareness, of consciousness, it's the prefrontal cortex, which is also known as the executive center of the brain. And it's that prefrontal lobe, okay? It's at the front of the brain. And to lead by example, we need to be operating at the front of our brain, not down at the amygdala in the center of the brain. But it requires work and effort to get to a level of operation so that you're living out of the prefrontal cortex, or you're majoritarily occupying that prefrontal cortex in terms of the blood glucose and oxygen are going to that area of the brain. It requires effort. It's very easy to live in this reactive world, this fight or flight response in terms of that survival area. And it's very easy. It's very black and white, that survival area of the brain. It's either prey or predator. It's one or the other. There's no gray, or there's no ability to think rationally. We just act or react. Sorry, it's probably more react. We don't act appropriately. So in order to lead your family, we need to be certainly occupying this executive function and living out of this executive function, so we can help our children to live in this executive function of the brain, because this is where we can rationalize things, we can better make decisions, we can think through objectively as opposed to subjective thinking, which happens in the survival part of the brain, because we just see things as black and white. It's clear cut. It's we're not thinking rationally or objectively about what we're perceiving through our senses. So in order to occupy or get the glucose and oxygen to that prefrontal cortex, that front of the brain, we need to be doing things that elevate our level of consciousness, which is essentially this whole concept around mindfulness. Okay, so this is where mindfulness come into it. And mindfulness practices help direct the blood glucose and oxygen to the prefrontal cortex and gets us out of that reactive survival center of the brain. So when we're living by what's important to us, truly important to us, we are able to access this prefrontal cortex, and we live authentically by our values, and we're able to better interact in the world. And so what are values? Values are things that are important to you, which some will also be shared, that will have or shared importance with your children, but not necessarily. Everyone has a distinct, unique set of values. Like your thumbprint is unique, your genetic makeup is unique. There will be some commonality amongst our values, such as one of my really high values is family, hence why I'm giving this webinar. And so family is very important to me. So I'll always prioritize the family. So obviously, if you're listening to this webinar, that's maybe one value we share in common, but there'll be other values that, like one of my obvious values that are really high on my list is health and education. As I mentioned before, I do a lot about my own health and obviously helping others with their health, but also I'm always educating myself in these areas that are important to me, such as family and health. Areas that I'm not interested in are like things like cars, for example, or things, toys. I'm not interested in toys or things. I'm more interested in people. So you'll have certain priorities. Like, you may be interested in cars. Cars may be important to you, and that's fine. You may be interested, like beauty is another thing that is not of interest to me, but may be important to you, is looking good and always dressing the best you can and presenting the best you can. I'm not good at that. I don't have much interest in that. I have no interest in fashion, but that's me. It's not you. And so it's important that you identify what's important to you. And I recommend you go to Dr. John Demartini's website, drdemartini.com, and do his value survey, and that will help you identify what's important to you and what's least important. And essentially what he says, in order to live a life of priority and a life you love, occupy or do the things you love that are important to you, and delegate the things that are low priority and not important. So I certainly, I don't like cars. I don't like driving, so I generally don't drive. And there's the things I'm not great with admin. I'll get people to help me out with admin and things like that. So anyway, I think you get my point. And it's important, if you can establish your values and then understand your children's values, you can better communicate with your children. You'll be occupying that prefrontal cortex. You'll be in that executive function where you're able to rationalize and process things better. You're able to control, govern your emotions, as opposed to in that survival thing. We just let go, right? The anger just comes out, the aggression just comes out, the frustration just comes straight out. We react as opposed to think and then act. So this will really help your family situation. And you can get, like, if you've got adolescents, children, you could get them to fill out the values determinant. It's called the values determinant on his website. And you could then understand your teenagers in terms of what's important to them, and then look at what's important to you. And you'll probably get a better understanding of why your children or your teenagers are doing what they're doing, or why you see why you're constantly seeing differences or indifferences, or it's because the values aren't perfectly aligned, and they never will be. It's accepting that them for who they are and what they value, and vice versa, and then be able to talk in one another's values. So if your teenager values, I'm just thinking of a good example here. For example, they value, I did have an example and it just left me, but it will come back to me. It was, so they value sport. There's a particular sport they're into. So just say soccer or football. It's the same thing anyway, but they value that. But you're struggling to get them to do their schoolwork, and that's important to you, is them getting a good education. That's what you want to ensure, that they, in those early years, or those developmental years of their life. We're constantly developing. We all develop, but I guess in order for you to then impart or enable them, to you feel that you've done everything possible to ensure that they've got the best education, then you talk to your son or daughter in the terms that how school will help their soccer. So, and you think in soccer there's mathematics, there's angles at which you need to kick the ball, and if they better understand geometry, for example, they could better understand where they need to kick, what point of the ball they need to kick in order to get the results or the trajectory. And there's physics, obviously there's mathematics, physics, There's probably other things that will come up. Mathematics, geometry, physics is going to be having an understanding of that will enhance their ability to play soccer. So if you align those two values, or link that, soccer being important to them to what's important to you, that they study mathematics and physics, or they, do their homework, is that if you can tie and link that with their value of what's really high, then they're more likely to do it. So that's one way in which you can lead and motivate your teenagers, for example. So I'm leaving you with this sort of values, and it's important because if you're living in alignment with your values, you're living authentically, you're living in your executive function, you're leading by example, then it's a lot easier to lead the family in that sense, and then to help them identify what's important to them. And if they live by their values, then they're going to live a very authentic, happy, fulfilled life. If you're doing things that are low on your value list, you procrastinate, right? So that's one way to determine what's low on your value list is the things you procrastinate over, okay? And in order for that task to get done, you either need to delegate it or you need to link it to something that's high on your values in order for it to get done. I think you get where I'm coming from. The middle point here, the middle step, is prioritization and self-care. So really putting yourself first, getting your house in order, your own house in order, and then you can better serve others. So it's important that you're at your best in order to help others to be at their best. And that's essentially what I do in my occupation. I need to be at my best so I can better educate, better support others in their health. Okay, if my health's not great, then how can I help others be healthy? And how are they going to take advice from me if they see me as unhealthy? So you need this congruence. You need to be living a life of congruence. You need to be living by your values. You need to be walking the talk and not talking it, talking the walk. So, the next one is, prioritize your family's mental health. So really put aside time to connect with one another. Connection is so important. No one wants a disconnected household. And in order to form a connected household, you need to create opportunities. You need to create the space and time for this connection to come together. So being busy or having, giving the excuse, I'm too busy, is a cop-out, essentially. Because if your family is important to you, it may not be. Well, and then you need to look at ways to link it with your higher values, or you need to delegate this to your partner that might value family more than you. So this prioritizing mental health requires bringing the family unit together, and this requires looking for time and opportunity to bring everyone together. And this was always done over family mealtime, but the family mealtime seems to be very disjointed these days. And it's one of my greatest tips to improve not only the dietary or the nutrition that your family eats on a regular basis by having this common times to eat and eating together and sharing what's going on in your world. So it not only helps with connection and mental health, it also helps with nutrition, and this will flow onto other areas, such as when your mental health is better, you have better connection, you feel better supported, you're eating better nutrition, then obviously you're going to perform better at whatever you do, whether it be your work or your sport, or you're going to have more energy in your day. So this will have so many flow-on benefits. So it needs to be prioritized. You need to prioritize. And even if you don't have any meal times together, just creating one night a week is a start. It's a positive. It's in terms of going in the right direction. So I suggest you find that night of the week where you can all eat together and embrace it and make it a special occasion. It could be Sunday night dinners. And then grow and try to increase that time, or then look for other opportunities throughout the week where you can get together as a family. So I'm going to share some tips in the nutrition section of things that can bond and bring families together. But, typically we've done a lot of bonding traditionally through food. And it's very easy to do. And so I'm going to share some tips on how you can bond through food. And if that's not important to you or your family, then you can bond through sport. You can play sport together. Or you can bond through doing some gardening or some activity that you have in common or share an interest in. The thing about food is that we all need to eat, so it's always something common. Some of these other areas, such as sport and hobbies, then there might not be the same consensus through the family, but certainly food is one that we all have in common, that we all need. And then the last, in terms of this stepping ladder, in terms of elevating your mental health, is the progress, and see progress. It's all about progress over perfectionism. So don't try to idealize what a perfect family should look like. There's no such thing as a perfect family, okay? There isn't. I can guarantee you'll never find a perfect family. There's always, and that's how the world's perfectly balanced, is that we have challenges. Every family has their own challenges. And part of life is we need to navigate through challenges. So don't have this fantasy that you're aiming for some utopia in terms of perfect family, because you're just going to make yourself depressed and be anxious that you're never obtaining it or never achieving it. So certainly don't look for perfectionism, and then don't also compare your family to others. Your family is completely unique. You have completely unique individuals that make up that family unit, and they have completely unique values. And so you should have your own family, and do it like just work together as a family. Let's work together, work through challenges together, support one another. That's what families for. And it's not comparing your family to other people's families, and that comparison, and you'll perceive that their family unit's better, but I can guarantee that there's just as many challenges within that perceived perfect family unit. Anyway, it doesn't exist. So just go for progress. Just seek that incremental improvement. Just as I suggested, that one meal a week that you get together, that's progress. Okay, just go for those little wins, those little baby steps, as we call them, and just build the momentum. It will start You'll start, starting to implement some of these ideas. You'll build momentum. Okay, so in terms of development of children, even development of adults, it happens at the border of support and challenge. So we need both in order to have optimal growth. If we have too much challenge, then and lack of support, that's when we can get really down. We can get burnt out, and that's not great for our mental health. It's not great for our family's health. So it's important that we have this equal and balancing, and that's where optimal growth will happen. And it won't happen perfectly this way. You'll find at times you have a bit more support than challenge, and life's too easy, and you might put on some weight and all those sort of things, and then or you just feel stagnant. When there's too much support and not enough challenge, you feel like you're not growing. You feel stagnant. You feel like life's boring. Then there'll be points in your life where there'll be lots of challenge and you feel that there's not enough support. And so it's a flux sort of state. But obviously, in those times where you're having lots of challenge, it could be now, you want to be building up that support network, or at least reaching out and getting the support from professionals, from family, from friends. So actually sharing what's going on with others that are close to you so that you can get their support. If other people are unaware of all the challenges you're facing, then they're not going to come and help you because they're unaware that you're facing a lot of challenge. So it's important that you share and share openly, and that supports your mental health. It also supports your growth and development. And it's the same with children. We need to work with this, finding this boundary. So obviously, if we challenge our children too much and give them too much responsibility and not enough support, then they may just fall in a heap in terms of not do anything and freeze, or they may run away from it, or they may procrastinate. And it's the same the other way around. If we don't give them enough responsibility and enough challenge and too much support, then that's when they could potentially get unhealthy, eat too much, not exercise enough, not feel great, feel a bit meh, like that sort of not good, not bad, but just in between, nothing. We like that sort of being on the boundary of growth and support and that development, and feel like we're growing as a person. But we want to obviously do it at a pace that we can maintain our health or maintain our sanity. There's no point of trying to grow too quickly or force too much growth upon our children and not give them enough support, because that may they may encounter mental health issues, too much anxiety, get too stressed out, get down because they're not meeting your expectations. So it's important that we balance, I guess, the amount of challenge that is given to our children. And look, so challenge is going to come in many different ways. Challenge will come from you in terms of giving the child more responsibility at the home. They will be challenged by their peer group, and there'll be certain, in order to fit in, there'll be challenges to fit in with the group. They may need to live a bit incongruent in order to fit in. These things happen, and they might, and that's not healthy, but that may be a challenge for them to feel that they want to be part of that group. They may need to do things that they don't think they should or don't want to. So that challenges can come from their peers. Challenges can come from their teachers in terms of homework deadlines and, stretching them in the classroom in terms of, their learning. There's many challenges can come through sport as well. So and it's important that you understand where all your children's challenges are, so that you can make sure that they're not overwhelmed in any particular area. And this is why having mealtime and allowing everyone to share what's going on in their day is really important, because that's when you understand, maybe my little Joey needs a bit more support in this area, and I'm going to need to talk to the teacher, or I need to talk to their coach, or I need to pull them back, and maybe we do a little bit less in order for them to get back to that area of development. Because if you're not on, if we don't help them find that balance between the challenge and support, then essentially they're not going to grow, and or they may not grow and wilt, or I think you understand where I'm coming from when you know that your children's under a lot of pressure. They'll either push themselves and extend themselves and burn themselves out, or they'll do the other thing, is just give up, and it's all too much, all too hard. And we don't want either. Obviously, we want to sort of maintain, this nice. But again, as I said, nothing is perfect, and there will be times where there's a little bit too much support and not enough challenge, and vice versa. But we just need to be doing our part in terms of understanding what's going on in our children's lives and taking an interest in what's going on in their life, and doing what we can to support them, and not putting too much burden on them. I often see kids overwhelmed with, I guess, parents' expectations. Essentially, it's nothing more than that. The parents want their children to be high achievers. That's important. Because the parent wants to be proud of their children, and they see that in order to be proud of their children, that their children need to be high achievers, which is not true. You can be proud of your children without them being high achievers. And I think it's certainly perception out there that success is all about overachievement. Success is not all about achievement, and you can achieve success, and success is what's important to the individual. And that may be different to you as a parent, and that may be hard for you to comprehend or get over. So this is why it's important to understand what your children really value and what's important to them, because it won't be perfectly aligned to you. And I think through having that understanding, you'll be able to help them and support them better in terms of being able to communicate and keep them engaged and keep that close relationship going, because you're talking in a language that they resonate with, because you're talking in a language that is, hey, that's important to me. You understand me. Whereas as opposed to talking down to them, being dismissive and saying, this is what's important, and disregarding what's important to them. So I think you're getting where I'm coming from, and it requires work, it requires effort, and everything I'm sharing today is going to require a bit of prioritization, putting a bit of investment of time in. And look, if, as I said, if you can't find the time, then obviously, and if you're procrastinating of it, you need to link it to your highest value. You need to find some linkage to your highest value. Otherwise, your children's health is really going to suffer. Don't leave it to other people. You have an important role in their life, and I'm really, this is what this is about, is helping you recognize that. And I'm sure there's people listening or watching that already recognize that. So I'm preaching to the converted, but those that aren't, then I'm just, I guess, speaking to you. So onwards and upwards. Yeah, so that optimal growth and development of a child will become at that boundary of support and challenge. And it's just, as I said, I want to reiterate, it's important to really spend time with your children and understanding where they're at and where they're challenged, so that you can make sure that they're properly supported. On to healthy eating. So I've used this picture. It drew my attention because you'd probably think healthy eating and associating that child with eating a gingerbread, and you're thinking, well, it's a bit incongruent or doesn't fit right. But I want to add some context around this photo. So there's a couple of things I'm going to make sure I cover in this topic of healthy eating. Is I want to make sure that your children don't end up with disordered eating. I certainly see a lot of disordered eating amongst teenagers, amongst early young adults, and it continues through adulthood. So I even see middle-aged adults with eating disorders, disordered eating. And it all starts from these early years, and the associations around food and the linkages. And so we're going to talk a bit about that so you can help your children best navigate through this period. And it really starts popping out. Well, I'm actually seeing it in primary school children, which is sad. So children like around 9 years old, really young, disordered eating. So this is where essentially children are using food as a way to change their body image or to change the way they look. And it's resulting in huge amounts of nutritional deficiencies. It's affecting their development, and it results in mental health issues, big time. Huge amount of mental health issues, and can ultimately result in hospitalization and death. So it's certainly no parent's desire to have or see or witness or and want to avoid this. So this is why we're covering this topic, and hence why I've got this picture. So let food be thy medicine, and not as a tool to change the way you look or to conform to societal perception. Is it societal? I mean, we perceive it as normal, but it's anyway. Move on. So healthy eating, again, you'll see this first and foremost, lead by example. So it's not it's really, you can say all you want about what you know telling your children what they should be eating, and if you're not eating that, then they're not going to do it. There's no doubt about that. So you need to lead by example. It starts with you. They will watch what you do and how you eat and what you say around food. And this is what leads me into the next point: is avoid labeling food. If you say, and you may just pop out with these comments, you may be talking to your partner, you may just say, look, I'm not eating that tonight, or pointing to the rice and say, I'm not eating that, it makes me fat. Okay. And so what association do they draw from that when they see that interaction with their parents? Well, straight away they look at the rice and they hear the word fat, and so they link being fat to rice. So what they take away from that is, if I eat rice, I will get fat. Okay, and that can be stored subconsciously if they're really young. So this happens pre 7 years old. They just store that in their subconscious, and that will then disassociate them from that food. As they grow older, they'll go out and, for example, they won't eat rice, and you'll think, why aren't they eating rice? Why won't you eat rice? And it could be just simply because of that comment you made one-off around the dinner table, and you associated rice with making you fat. And one thing I can say is, rice in itself does not make you fat and is not unhealthy. And that's the same with all food. There's no food that's going to just make us fat by eating it. Eating too much of any food may make us fat, but there's no direct. That black and white association is, again, system one's thinking. It's in that survival mechanism, prey, predator. This will do this. It may, if you overindulge in it, of course. But this, if you're thinking at that system 2 level and thinking objectively, and I can look at rice and I can see, it perfectly balanced food. It's got fiber in it. It has protein in it. Yes, it does have carbohydrates in it. It has vitamins in it, minerals in it. So it's pretty complete, and it's affordable. So anyway, I just want you to be aware of this food labeling, and it's the same as looking at anything else. Or I don't like that. I don't eat greens. Or just try to avoid making those associations in front of your children. You might want to whisper to your partner, but then again, your kids will see what's on your plate, and if it's not the same as what's on their plate, they will think, well, why do I have to eat this, or why should I eat this when you're not? So it's important that you eat the same things, and this is what really gets me with kids' meals. Is the kids' meals are rubbish, majority. I mean, I am generalizing here, but generally speaking, they are rubbish. And adults' meals, well, but I just don't know why we have this separation, because kids, at a certain age, they've got the ability to chew and swallow. Why can't they eat what adults are eating? And I've never, Adriana and I have never gone to the kids menu. Well, at times we may, and it may be to help them fit in with their other friends if they're with friends. But as a family unit, they never eat from the kids menu. They've always eaten as adults. We've always ordered from the adults, and they've eaten what we've eaten. And so we have no issues with our children eating full different, like a variety of cuisines, because from an early age they were eating variety, and not just eating from because the thing is, as the kids grow up, they will just get familiar with those kids' menus foods, and that's all they will eat. And then you'll get frustrated, because then you'll finally want them to eat adults' meals, but adults' meals are unfamiliar to them. And we have in our genetic makeup, this thing of, it's a survival mechanism that we want to see other people eating something before we will eat it, or we will assess whether it's safe to eat by seeing other people eat it. And in the wild, these tribes and whatnots, observed animals and whether animals ate it and what happened and all those sort of things. And then they'd try it in small amounts to see if it had a reaction and things like that. But but we still have that primal survival mechanism within us. And this is why children initially will look at food on their plate that's new and not familiar with it, and look at it and not want to eat it. They're judging whether it's safe or not. And it generally, but if they keep seeing that food on the plate, and this is one way to get kids to eat something that you want them to eat, is keep putting it on the plate. You keep eating it. And eventually it will, then they see you eating it, they see it as a familiar item on their plate, and they develop the relationship that it's safe to eat, and they'll eat it. And this is the issue with having kids menus, is that they'll get familiar with all the kids menus, which is not much different. It's essentially fish and chips, nuggets and chips, maybe some steak and chips, something else and chips. And they'll get really familiar with those foods, and whenever they're served up, they'll know that they're safe and that they should eat them, because that's what they always ate as with the family when eating out. However, if you then try to get them to choose something from the adults menu, they'll sort of look at it and they'll then think, "Oh, I don't know about that," and be suspicious. And it will take a while to break that habit and make the adult menu more familiar and safe and recognizable. And again, it's somewhat changing the taste buds of children, because serving up fish and chips and all that, what they're getting used to is highly fat foods, highly salted foods, and highly calorific foods. And so their palates will develop around these foods. And then you're wanting them to eat, say, I don't like calling it label healthier, but you're wanting them to eat something you're eating, and you think it'll be better for their growth and development. And then it's not as satiate. I struggle to say the word. It's not as palatable. It's probably an easier word for me to say, to the kid. And it's going to take them a while to change that palate. So breaking that habit of them eating those highly palatable foods to now eating, less desirable, less palatable foods, is going to be a journey that you need to go on. And if you haven't gone on, you've got to start. The sooner you start, the better. So start small and start making some small changes and making it familiar to them, and leading by example. So this last point here is eating together. Make it a team effort. I've given some suggestions as to what you can do. Make some fun around it. Make eating fun. Make being together fun. And children will they'll look forward to it. They'll say, when is our next theme night? When can we do something exciting? Get them involved, and get them involved at young ages with cooking, or even like gardening, in terms of where food comes from. The more you engage a kid from the gardening, from the grassroots of nutrition, the better habits they'll form over time, and they will have great eating palates. They will eat well, balanced, variety, and you'll have very thriving children as a result of that early education, that early associations with where food comes from. And it's fun to children. Children love playing in the garden. So we don't have much land, and I appreciate if you live in Sydney, you probably don't have much land, but you can buy these garden boxes, which you can have your little herb garden, or plant some tomatoes, some carrots, and just different vegetables, mix it up, and get the children involved with playing in the dirt. And yes, get a bit dirty, they love it. You'll bond with them, you'll talk, talk about things. I'll bring up things that you'll you won't normally hear about, because they're in a good space. They're, gardening together is bringing you both to operate out of that systems two thinking, that higher level of thinking, prefrontal cortex, where we can better connect, better converse, think rationally, think objectively, and problem solve. So when you're both gardening together, you'll be working out of that center. You'll have control over your emotions, better governance over your emotions, be more harmony, more peace, and ultimately better discussions. And so they may bring up some trauma they've suffered or some challenges they've suffered that they think is now the right time, because I feel peace. I feel at peace. I feel comfortable with you. And I think this is the right time to bring it up. So it's these sort of bonding moments where you'll be surprised with what you hear your children say and come out with. So yes, create, garden, get into it together, put aside the time. Yes, it's an investment of time, it's investment of energy, but if you really want thriving children, then this is one way of creating this thriving environment, is getting them involved, and seeing the family unit as a team. As we all work together. It's just not mum and dad running around like headless chooks. It's everyone pulling and doing their part. And yes, they may make a little mess and you think, oh, that wasn't worth it because there was more mess than what was the output. But life's not about outputs. Life's about a journey that we go on. And in that journey, we encounter joy, we encounter disappointments. That's all part of life. And you just want to see this as the journey you're going on with your children developing. If your outcome, if you're very outcome driven and you think, well, I just don't have time for that because it's just going to take up time and be no benefit, your system one thinking, for starters, you're obviously black and white, and you need to elevate your thinking and get into that higher level of consciousness. Because I think if you really think through what that task can bring in terms of the bond to your child, in terms of what it does for their development, you will start to see the rationale and the why it's important to invest that time. So, I just really think that rather than maybe judge some of these ideas I've got up here and say I don't have the time for that, is to start, maybe do a meditation, maybe do a mindful practice, and then start thinking objectively about what I've shared and the benefits. There's obviously drawbacks to everything you do. So not spending the time with the children, buying McDonald's and all that, there's positives to that. It's convenient, obviously. It saves you time. It's probably less cleaning up, but there are drawbacks. Obviously, there's lack of nourishment for the family. There's, what are you teaching your kids about food? Food's just something we buy out. What are you educating? Those quick meals, how much discussion is had over those quick meals? Whereas if you get involved with the cooking process, it's over a much longer time span, and it enables us to have more meaningful conversation as opposed to yes, no answers, quick, how was your day? Good. What are you doing tomorrow? Good. Yep, blah, blah, blah. That's very transactional. Really deep, meaningful conversation will come with time. It needs to have time invested. I've seen this in mental health circles that I've led and supported people through. In those circles, the one thing one of the success behind those circles and why the mental health of the participants improved was the time. It was the time that was put aside, and it was a environment that was conducive for people to share. And so when you have these transactional conversations, such as we get Macca's, we throw down some food, yes, no, what are we doing tomorrow? What have we done today? Blah, 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 blah. There's no space there for any child to bring up any concern because they just think mum and dad don't have the time to have this discussion. There's not the space for me to share this with them. So the space needs to be created. The space is generated when you're doing these tasks together. You're working towards a common objective, which is obviously having food on the table, but you're working together as a team. And when you're feeling that team atmosphere around you, you're more likely to bring, because that team atmosphere brings a level of conducive environment, supportive environment. And that's when we're more likely to share those deep concerning things with others, is where we feel that there's a level of support that I can share this. And this is what happened in these mental health circles that I facilitated. It was a conducive environment that had space and time, and people all had a common objective. They wanted to improve their mental health. So you can do this by running family cooking sessions, doing it together as a team. And, you can get young kids involved. They can wash potatoes. And yes, they'll make a mess. Of course they will, but they'll love it. And they'll say, can we do it again? Because they want to learn with, that early stage of development, like at preschool, it's all tactile learning. There's obviously visual and auditory learning as well, but there's a lot of tactile learning. So they learn a lot by feeling. And so washing potatoes can be great. You can get them to wash any vegetable. You can get them to collect things from the cupboard. And yes, they may pull the wrong thing out, but they're learning. You are educating your children in the process of doing this activity. So it's not the end outcome. I've got to have dinner on the table by such and such a time. It's more the journey that you all go on together. And obviously then you're creating these great helpers within the family, so that then cooking becomes less of a chore and more as a fun experience that you do together. And again, you need to be selective of what nights this will work. This won't work on the nights that you're working late or the kids have lots of extracurricular activities. But you want to find a night, just one night a week, where this can work. And you'll have so much fun, I can guarantee it, that then you'll look for a second night and it will build from there. Okay, so let's. This webinar is going to exceed the hour, but I apologise. I just probably was a bit too ambitious as to what I could cover in this short period of time. But I'm going to continue. So I hope you can. If you need to leave the webinar now. I'll have a recording. You can come back and catch up with where you left off. For those that can continue, please listen on. Would love you to, continue to empower yourself around how you can help create a thriving household. So healthy eating. I think we all know, like, carbohydrates. It's easy to get children to eat carbohydrates. It's easy for parents to eat carbohydrates. And there's an abundance of carbohydrates. What is more challenging is the vegetables. And so this is where I really want some focus and effort and energy put into, is looking at ways in which you can present vegetables to make them attractive and to make them a star of the dish as opposed to a side, okay? If we can bring vegetables as an attractive part of the dish and make them the star of the dish, then for your children, as they grow up, it will just become part of them. Like, for example, I can share this story. I had a mate who was brought up in a household that would eat well and didn't eat a lot of processed foods and ate a lot of natural raw and foods. And so I remember him when he left home. I went over to his house and he was having a snack, and I think we were doing some activity that afternoon after work, and he pulled a carrot out of his fridge and ate a carrot as a snack. And now, how many adults do you know that actually grabs a carrot and eats it? And this is the way he was brought up. So carrots were his snack when he was being brought up. So that's what he knows, and that's what he likes, and that's what his palate's developed around. And so you can do this by making the effort and making vegetables the star. And yes, carrots, celery sticks, cucumber, they can all become great snacks. Cherry tomatoes, nuts and seeds, all fantastic snacks. And yeah, your palate will develop around the kids' palate will develop around these foods, and they will, and if you have the important thing is when you're eating these foods is that you have an environment that's fun or um, memorable in terms of a good experience, for example. So, because then they develop an association around eating vegetables or plant-based foods around having fun. And it could be that's what you do on your theme nights, is that it's primarily we're going to make vegetables the star of the dish and we're going to make vegetables taste yummy. And then they'll have a strong association with linkage, and this is the way we reinforce habits, is through linkage and developing layers of linkage, strong connections within the neural networks, and then these habits will just become lifelong. So it's really important that you look up recipes and make vegetables, fruit, the star of the dish, plant-based foods, the star of the dish, and then create that environment around it, make it tasty, make it fun, make it enjoyable. Challenge one another in terms of coming up with ways in which you could make it more palatable. We have herbs and spices that can really change and enhance the flavor of vegetables. So that's probably the area of focus that I suggest you work on. And variety is the key. It's like that box challenge. So I've got here mentioned take up the fruit and box challenge. So you can order a regular fruit and vegetable box from various distributors, where they will comprise the fruit and vegetable box based on what's seasonal, and so you'll get thrown in whatever's seasonal. And that's great because you get the box and you think, well, how am I going to use this? How am I going to use this? How am I going to blend this? So it actually elevates your thinking into that system 2 thinking, in terms of that heightened creative level of thinking. And it challenges you, and so it can challenge the family. So the kids can look up Google and think, well, okay, cabbage. What cool meal can we create with a cabbage? Or anyway, so that can really throw. And again, it does require an investment of time. I acknowledge that. If you don't have the time and you want to take a smaller step, then there's options such as Marley Spoon, where essentially they do all the prepping of the food and they just put all the ingredients in the box, and you just have to bring it all together and cook it. So you can still have that family experience around the Marley Spoon box. However, it can provide that element of convenience if you're struggling to find the time. So I acknowledge that, and it might be easier for you and the family to do that sort of Marley Spoon option. But it is just taking that extra step so that you're not getting takeaway every night, or you're just looking to do something different that's going to take your family in that healthy, happy, thriving direction. It's just taking a step, and that step can be small, and then you can just build on it. Or you can essentially do your shopping at the supermarket, and then if you see an unfamiliar vegetable, just grab that. And then that can be the challenge. And you can then say, how can we make this the center of the dish? And then look it up. And it could be something you do on weekends where you've got a bit more time, or it could be that theme night. That box challenge can provide some, does provide some challenge, brings out creativity, and can bring out fun, because you'll find different strengths within different children. And it can be very bonding because you're doing something together for the same, it's like any team sport. You've got the same objective and you're working together towards that objective. The next one that I see often that's not managed well with children's health is around protein. There's generally the lack of protein in their diet. And this is because of processed foods. Processed foods will be made up of cheap ingredients, essentially. And protein isn't a cheap ingredient. It is an expensive ingredient. As you know, the cost of meat, the cost of fish, it ain't cheap. Cost of nuts and seeds, none of it's cheap. But look, the cost of rice, the cost of potatoes, the cost of sugar, a lot cheaper relative to these other foods that are higher in protein. Yeah, there's protein in rice, there's protein in potato, just a lot less than how much, or in terms, I guess how much, or the concentration of protein in, say, a steak. Make sure, and I think this is where I need to mention breakfast. Breakfast need to be the important meal. That it may be a time of the day where you're busy and you don't have a lot of time and everything seems to be rushed. I think it's making the time, or putting the time aside the night before, in order to make sure your kid goes to school on a good, satisfied start to the day. Having a bit of toast. Like with toast, there's carbohydrates, so it does give them a bit of blood glucose to burn, but it burns out very quickly, and then their concentration can waver, and hence, kids' concentration at school is important, so they need to have an element of protein to help manage blood sugars. Okay, otherwise the kids will go through blood sugar spikes, because essentially what they'll have is some toast for breakfast, then they'll have a packet of chips at morning tea, and essentially it's just spiking their blood glucose. And so what happens, and the teachers would appreciate if you did this, adding protein, because the kids will be more attentive in class. So essentially, by having those quick, easy options that are high in carbohydrates, spikes the blood glucose, sends the kid hyperactive, and hence why, there's supposedly lots of ADHD and all that at school. I mean, for me, a lot of it's just poor diet and kids looking for attention that they're not getting, and there's all sorts of other causations. It's not just a problem that the kids it just evolves. It's generally a build-up of sleep deprivation, poor eating, and lack of attention at home, or just the bad family dynamics, whatever. But anyway, so if you want your kids to best learn, they really need a solid breakfast, and a breakfast that contains protein. So great breakfast sources of protein in the morning, like oats with nuts and seeds. Again, you might just start with oats. With the oats, like, I'm just thinking as a starting point, if your kids haven't been familiar with nuts and seeds, then they're not going to eat the oats if the nuts and seeds are in them. But a porridge with a simple porridge would be oats with milk, yogurt. So the milk and yogurt are adding additional protein to the oats, and then you want to sweeten it with a healthy sweetener such as fruit. So chopped up fruit, so it could be berries on top. Banana is another one. You want to avoid adding spoons of pure sugar. It's just creating this highly palatable tongue towards high sugar. It's just something that is not good for children, and you want to really help them sort of grow out of, so to speak, by getting them to change their palate over time. It will take time, definitely will take time. Okay, so I think I've just given you a rough idea of what you could do for a quick breakfast that's healthy. You may need to, if you're going to add some sweetener and you can't get away with just adding fruit, then just a teaspoon of honey or half a teaspoon of honey. Just add the bare minimum to get them to eat it, and over time they'll get used to it, and then you can sort of build it from there. Another option is eggs for breakfast, eggs on toast. Again, it takes a little bit more time, but it's time worth investing. If education, your kids' education is a priority for you, then it's worth investing the little bit of time that it takes to make sure they get that good start to the day. Protein in every meal. So you want to make sure breakfast, lunch, and dinner all contain protein, good protein sources. So good protein source at lunchtime would be meat, for example. So it could be tuna, it could be chicken, It could be, it could be kept like leftovers from the night before on a sandwich with some salad, or again, it's sort of accommodating where your children are at. Again, as I said, I'm just sharing general advice here, but it certainly can see me for more specific advice if you're really needing help in this area. In terms of fats are, again, another key macronutrient that kids need, and it's particularly in development. Their brain, I think it's 2/3 of the brain is built on fat, and the other third's probably, I think it's protein. So it's so important to have good fats in their diet. So it's good fats. It's not the rubbish McDonald's chip fats or McDonald's burgers fats. It is healthy fats, such as fats from nuts, seeds, fats from oily fish such as salmon, tuna, mackerel, sardines, anchovies. Fish in general will have contain the ones I mentioned just have a higher amount of the healthier fats, but obviously white fish also has healthy fats as well. Olive oil, avocado. Avocado is a great spread to put on that kids like. So avocado can be a great addition in terms of and then like walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds. All these things are great, and you can get away with like doing a smoothie. So a smoothie is another way to get this protein, and so you can get a good quality protein powder. And what I say, a good quality, it's not a processed one, so I wouldn't be getting some Milo something. Milo's complete rubbish, but getting actually a good quality, not highly sugary protein, and then you add fruit, which is the good sugar, and then you add your fats, such as you could add, you can add some chia seeds, and or add some avocado, and when you blend it up, the kids won't even notice it. So there's plenty of ways in which you can do this, and I can certainly help you with different ways to navigate around this. So I mentioned, I said, as much as I don't like labeling, it's important to educate. It's education is the foundation for helping them to eat nutritiously, and teach them the why. Kids will resonate with the why, and if eating these foods will give you more sustained energy as opposed to these quick energy that just sends you crazy for a period of time and you can't concentrate and you get in trouble. That manic sort of energy will come from sugar, but that more controlled, regulated energy will come from low GI foods, low glycemic index foods, complex carbohydrates, good protein, mixed with good protein, good fats, and fiber. So that will more balance blood sugars, keep children more, help them with their attention span, help them learn better. And the other thing that's important is that you don't encourage that association with emotional eating. So what I see a lot of is I see it with adults actually, is that when they're feeling down, they will eat certain foods that their mother or father gave to them when they were little. In terms of when they felt down, they would say, well, have this ice cream, it'll make you feel better. Okay, that is a terrible association, because then the association is with ice cream makes me feel better. So as an adult, if they're feeling down, they will just eat buckets of ice cream, which, as you know, anything in excess is not great. Well, obviously you eat anything in excess and it's taking up room where you could get other nutrition in, and you're probably consuming more calories than what you need in this sedentary world that we live in. So teach them the why around, why it's important to eat their vegetables and why it's important to eat the good fats. And I can certainly help in this area as well if you want further support. And again, enjoy in moderation. So, it's like kids can have those joy foods, or joy foods. I don't want to call them, I don't want to label them joy foods, but probably let's call it more palatable foods that are, just perfectly scientific formulated with the right amount of fat and carbohydrates and salts, the perfect combination, so that's highly palatable, so that you want more. This is what these companies pay scientists to do. Those sort of foods, we want to, let the kids know that they're sometimes foods. We don't eat them all the time. We'll have a celebration and we'll have these foods. So, okay, with celebrations, provided the celebrations aren't every meal. Anyway, it's just getting across the point that they're not everyday foods like vegetables and good quality protein. They're everyday foods. Good quality fats, everyday foods. Low GI carbohydrates, they're everyday foods. High GI, which is the lollies, they're not everyday foods. They're just the sometimes, and we have them during celebrations. Okay, so we're on to sleep, and well and truly gone over time, but let me cover off this. I think there's only one slide here, a couple of slides, and then a summary slide. So in terms of sleep, it's so important to maintain a consistent routine. Kids, they will love routine because it makes them feel secure. And that's one of the most important things for kids, because they're dependent. They need to feel secure. And routine gives them that security. They know what's coming next. Okay. When there's when their routine's in constant dynamic flux, then they become uneasy, and they'll get, as a result of that, may get anxious. So routine is really keen. Again, it is also important to spice up the routine, but at the level that they're willing, that works for that age group. And again, it's going to be different for really young toddlers. They require huge amounts of routine because they're so dependent on you for survival. And so having that routine gives them certainty, gives them security. It's really important. As they grow older, obviously they're becoming more and more independent. So yes, there can be some more flexibility because they can tolerate more. Essentially, change of routine is a challenge, like I mentioned before. And, you don't want to be constantly challenging them because you're constantly changing up the routine. So keep to the same routine. And that includes a consistent to bedtime. Okay. And this will vary based on the age that your children are at. Obviously, teenagers, they're what we call the, it's not the biological clock, it's the chronological clock, the day-night cycle. Just trying to think of I can't believe it escaped me. But anyway, I'm human as well. So it will come to me. But the day-night cycle. So as children get into those teenage years, then they will get tired out later, and hence why teenagers go to bed later. It's just where they're at with their development. And when their melatonin is start to produce, which melatonin provides that, I guess that brings on that onset of tiredness and keeps children asleep, or keeps us asleep. So that melatonin onset is later. So whereas for toddlers, it's earlier. And for older parents, it sort of then goes back to younger. So you go to bed earlier as you get older. So it changes throughout the life cycle. Now, in terms of the importance of sleep, it cannot be made up. So don't think that you can have a late night with your children and yes, they can just make it up the next night. Sleep deficit builds and has a detrimental effect long term. Obviously, the more sleep deprived someone is for longer, the more adverse health outcomes happen as a result of that. So obviously one late night and a sleep deprived night is not going to have significant long-term complications, health complications, but making that a regular thing, then yes, there will be long-term health implications with constant sleep deprivation. Although having a night of poor sleep certainly affects the attention at school and the retention. So it will severely affect the retention. The studies have shown that, and the attention. So the retention and attention is certainly affected by a poor night's sleep. So the learning outcomes will be impaired the following day, and long-term memories impaired. So sleep deprivation, certainly something we don't want to be encouraging with children. It's really important. So it's not necessarily, studying longer is studying longer and resulting in sleep deprivation is not the best and optimal for their learning, enhanced learning. What's more optimal is being more efficient with your study and, optimizing sleep, making sleep part of that study regime, and finding that right balance between getting enough sleep and getting the study done, because the retention will happen during the sleep. That's when the neurological networks fuse together. So that happens whilst we sleep. If the sleep doesn't happen, then the retention from that day is lost. So it's quite simple, and endless studies will show this. So what's also important is having a long wind down, particularly for children. So, doing activities just before bed isn't great. And I mean extracurriculum, like doing late activities into the evening. It will impair their ability to wind down. It'll take them a bit longer, hence why I've got 1 to 3. 1 to 3 is hours. I needed to put the hours next to the 1 to 3. So obviously, if you've had a more relaxed afternoon after school, then probably 1 hour wind down is sufficient. But if your children have been running around with extracurricular activities, busy, then they're going to need a longer wind down. What do I mean by wind down? It is just relaxing, not doing much, making sure there's minimal electronic exposure, such as TVs, screens. There's adjustment in terms of the light they're exposed to. So you don't want a really bright house. They need to, their light receptors need to see darkness in order to start producing melatonin. So if the kid's exposed to bright light and then you put them to bed with the lights out, it's going to take them a fair while to fall asleep, because their body then decides, okay, it's the right time, I can, make melatonin. And so the body's got to make it produce enough so they fall asleep. So that can be frustrating for the parent, because kids will keep coming out saying, I can't sleep. Whereas if you had this longer wind down and a darker room, cooler room, yes, the room temperature needs to be between 16 and 18 degrees. So you don't want the house 22 degrees, too hot. The kids only want to be, you don't want to have too much doonas or covers. It just needs to be so that they're, I guess, they're neither hot or cold. It's the Goldilocks principle. And again, that's generally a room temperature somewhere between 16 and 18 degrees. And so certainly no electronic devices in the room. That just results in sleep deprivation. That's the worst thing teenagers do, is have electronic devices in their room. So ideally, their study should be in another room if possible. If not, it's done in their own room. Then there should be some routine where they disconnect, like they take their computer out, their laptop, put it in another room. They put their phone in another room, and they don't have it anywhere near them. And you buy them an alarm clock if they need it. It's really important that they keep away from the white and blue lights, because that suppresses melatonin production. Suppressed melatonin production will result in poorer sleep, and therefore poorer attention and retention the next day. Okay, so here's recommended sleep hours as from an infant all the way through to another newborn, all the way through to an older adult. As you can see, it's higher when they're younger, and it gets less as they get older. And I can certainly share this for you. But I got this from the Sleep Foundation. So you go to the sleepfoundation.org. You'll see the chart around recommended hours of sleep as we develop. And in summary, we finally got there. So I apologize for the overrun, but I just love what I'm sharing, and just wanted to make sure I shared a holistic picture of children's health. Maybe I should have done it in a series and not all in one episode. So maybe that's learning for me. But lead by example, prioritize your health, put your oxygen mask on first, and then you can best serve your family and be best supportive of your family when you're in optimal health. So make it a priority to look after yourself, lead by example, walk the talk, as I said, make sure your actions are louder than your words. And make health fun. Really, I think the more you can create fun around health, the more likely it is to become an important part of your child's development, and continue into their adulthood as being an important part of an integral part of their life. So certainly bring fun to health, make it fun, make it community, make it team, make it enjoyable, and make it tasty, and just ensure balance in all areas of health. Covers three areas of holistic health, that being mental health. We didn't really touch a lot on mindfulness, but we'll leave that for another episode. But I've actually got a little short course on mindfulness, and I can also share that link if you're interested. Mindfulness for families, actually. So it's a particular mindfulness program for families. So I can certainly share you that link if you're interested. And making sure you're investing in all areas of health. It's not just all about mental health. It's not just all about nutrition. It's doing something in all the areas, and as a result, the outcome is enhanced. So it's really important you invest in all areas of health. And as I mentioned during this webinar, is that don't think that you're doing anything wrong or bad, or you're doing all the things you should be. It is what you are where you are, and you've done an amazing effort in terms of showing up to this webinar, or listening to the recording. And you should be proud of yourself for doing that. Now it's just putting into action just one thing you've learned from today's webinar, and then to just see it as incremental progress in terms of taking your family on a journey. On a health journey. You're never going to get this perfect family. Perfect family doesn't exist, as I said earlier. It's just a constant progress, never-ending progress. And yes, there'll be challenges on the way. There'll be falls and trip-ups and mistakes and whatnot. I'm still learning on my journey as a parent, but it's a constant, never-ending journey. There's things that I did in the early days that I more aware of now that I sort of thought, I wish I had been aware of that. That's what I'm hoping to impart today is things that I've learned along my journey as a parent, and what I've learned through my studies. I'm hoping I impart that in a timely manner to you, so that you can I guess hopefully avoid some of the trips that I made or falls I made. But again, it's perfectly part of the learning experience too. So that's it for today. Thanks for if you enjoyed the recording, please share it with others. I'd love to impart this education on more people and empower more people. So please share it with others. And follow me on all social media platforms. And really appreciate the time that you've taken to join the webinar, and hope you enjoyed it. And follow me on social. I'm on all the platforms. Me&my wellness. And if you got any content or anything you'd like me to provide another webinar on, please share that idea as well. I'm very open and would love to further support your thriving family. So take care. Bye for now.